Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. I'm Mike Dowdy, and I have here with me a guest that I have been wanting to have on here forever. So for those of you who know, I am the voice of the Marshall Memo. So every single week, I read the Marshall Memo out loud, and then Kim sends it out with next week's memo. And I would say one of the most summarized authors that I see in the Marshall Memo is Timothy Shanahan. And Tim is joining me today. Tim, you have forgotten more about reading instruction than I will ever know. So I'm super excited to talk to you. Welcome.
Well, thank you. The only reason that's true, what you just said, is because I've been doing this so long.
And that's okay.
I'm old that have been doing this since I was a very young man.
Now, where's this podcast find you today? Where are you?
I'm in Chicago. I'm at home. Thank goodness.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I'm in Albany, New York. So we're probably about a similar latitude. It's about the same
Cold.
weather.
It's cold.
So Tim, you just published a new book called Leveled Reading, Leveled Lives. And before we started recording, we were starting to talk about it. I'm glad we kept it. Can you tell folks about this book? Like, why this book? Why now? What? Come on, is this stuff we've known? Like, what's going on?
Well, there are lots of reasons for the book. I mean, certainly one of them is that reading levels in the United States really haven't risen in the time that we've been closely monitoring it. The federal government started testing reading in the late 1960s. First report came out in 70 or 71. And since then, well, in those days, they did it every 4 or 5 years. Now they do it every 2 years. But what you'll see is that reading levels sometimes they've gone up a little bit. Right now they're down a little bit, but they've been really, really flat despite all kinds of reforms and changes of curriculum and infusions of funding, either at the state or the federal or the local levels. And none of it has worked. And I've come to believe one of the reasons for that is that we have an ideology, we have a belief system that gets teachers adjusting instruction in ways that actually are keeping kids from meeting their potential rather than propelling them to that. So that'd be one reason. Another reason is, frankly, I, as a teacher and as a teacher educator at the university, always promoted and used this approach that I'm saying is problematic. And so it's required that I make a big change in my thinking. And so that makes it interesting to me. I did this, I believed this for a long time. Now I've changed my mind. What made me change my mind? And what's going on here? So I think that's really, those are the kinds of things that made me decide to write the book.
So we haven't gotten, but what's it? The one in the 70s, was that A Nation at Risk, or was that one later?
Nation at Risk was early 80s.
Early 80s, right?
Like 80s, something like that. 80s,
okay, so there it is, right? Leveled Reading, Leveled Lives. That has been the drumbeat for reading instruction since I think I became a principal in the early 2000s. I remember how excited I was when I got the business official to cough up 10 grand so I could make a book room with leveled books. So Tim, you write this book, and now I'm finding out that wasn't a good use of money.
It probably wasn't such a good use of money. The idea is actually much older than that. I learned to read being taught in that way, just like I taught in that way. People were kind of making fun of it when I was becoming a teacher in the late 60s and early 70s, because it had been around for so long. And it just, we changed the curtains a little bit. We changed the slip covers, but all the furniture is pretty much the same. If you go way back, if you go back 100 years, you're going to find that authorities on reading would say things, they'd write things like, you have to teach children at their reading level. They never defined it. They never explained it. So it's just one of these truisms that, oh, you teach kids at their level, and now we can just move on and not worry about that. That's the teacher's problem. In the 1940s, that changes. We come up with a scheme that comes up with how you test the kids and how you look at the books, and essentially the notion was that there were certain criteria that if kids met those, you would match them to certain books. And so the initial idea, and there've been variations on this, but the initial idea was that a youngster had to be able to read a text with 95% accuracy, 95 to 98%, and their comprehension had to be 75 to 89%. So you'd ask them 10 questions and they could answer a bunch of them. Essentially, that was all to be accomplished without any instruction. So the kid reads the text and they can read it that well. And that tells you that's the book you should be teaching them out of. What more recent research is saying is it's way too easy. It's not giving kids much opportunity to learn. There isn't enough there that they won't know that's actually going to be beneficial for them instructionally. So, as I said, people have come up with variations of it. It's interesting. Every variation that anybody's put forth always was sort of aimed at making it a little harder, which should tell us something.
Right. That it didn't make sense to begin with. But that's fascinating to me that decades, multiple decades of reading instruction have been based on truisms that somebody just sort of made up. Now, it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, people have figured out in the early 20th century that just because kids were all in the same grade level, their abilities and skills weren't all equal. So, not all 7-year-olds are the same. And therefore, there was a need for some kind of differentiation. And, you have to remember, in those days, classrooms typically had anywhere from about 50 to 70 kids in them. And so teachers were coming up with the idea on their own of they could have small group instruction, and somehow they never wrote about it, but they did write about the grouping and so on. Somehow they were varying the text. Even in surveys, they were saying they were varying the text, but we really don't know anything about that. And of course, their small groups were about the size of our classroom today.
Really?
Yeah, because you have 75 kids in your class, you're going to have 3 groups of 20 to 25 kids.
It's unbelievable when you think about that's the way things were. But it was interesting to hear you talk. Like when you first started teaching in the late 60s and early 70s, when all this stuff came out about Marie Clay and all that stuff, I called my father because I think he graduated from college in 1968 and he was a remedial reading teacher. That's how he got his draft deferment from Vietnam. And I asked him, I'm like, what? And said, you were in there like when this stuff was like first becoming a thing. And he's like, yeah, we were all kind of scratching our head. But okay.
It's what one of the things I learned or became aware of when I was writing in the book is when they're trying to come up with this scheme, there were a whole bunch of ideas that people had put forward. It's at least a dozen school districts put out, the Berkeley plan or the Joplin plan or the Albany plan. All of them were aimed at solving this particular problem or addressing this problem. And every single one of them was a curricular reform. We'll teach kids with different books, which means you're teaching them different things about reading. None of them were, why don't we try to teach everybody to read the grade level book, but why don't we change our instruction? Why don't we vary how we do it? Instead of guaranteeing, Mike isn't reading as well as the other 4th graders, so I'm going to put him in a 2nd grade book, and I'm going to make sure he never gets as far as the other kids. Instead of well, let's keep them in the fourth grade book with everybody else. But what if we have them read it twice? What if we do this, that, or the other thing to try to overcome the fact that, yeah, he's struggling with that book more than some of the other kids are.
All right. So now this begs the natural question. We've been admiring this problem for the better part of 100 years. So, okay, what are we supposed to do here? Because I feel like the science of reading whole thing was well intentioned, as most reforms are. Um, I watched it sort of roll out in this region of upstate New York, and I had people in the room going, why is somebody telling me what I already know about teaching reading? And yet they're not doing it. So
Right.
where do we go? I mean,
Well,
is this job security for Timothy Shanahan to think?
well, the fact is, I discovered the problem with this in terms of the research, not in terms of practice. As I said, as a teacher, I tested my kids. I had different level books. I had the kids in the different small. I did it all. I even thought that was why people thought I was a good teacher.
Same.
I mean, seriously. Back in the 1980s, I was writing a chapter that allowed me or required that I go back and read the original research that this scheme, this instructional level idea was based on. And I was stunned. I couldn't understand how that could be the source of how I taught. I mean, my imagination was that somebody had come up with that scheme. They had then tried it out on some kids and compared how they did with the other kids who, were still just being taught with the grade level text, and that their kids had learned more, and therefore that's why it was a good idea. That's what I assumed the study was. What the study actually was is they gave a bunch of kids a reading test, or actually a small bunch of kids a reading test, and they were looking to see what's the relationship between how many oral reading errors they made, how fluent they were, and reading comprehension. And that's where that 95 to 98% came from. If the kids fell much below 95% in oral reading, their comprehension dropped.
So they just did what? Correlation between those two?
Uh-huh. It was just a correlation of one small group of fourth graders. And that was where the scheme came from and why it was research based.
Get out of town.
Nobody had tried it,
I can't. Oh my
but it
God.
caught on because what it allows us to do is this is really the answer to your question. What it really allows us to do is avoid the problem. See, anyone who's ever observed in a classroom or taught in a classroom and sees kids who are struggling to make sense of a text, struggling to read a text, knows how painful that can be and how helpless you feel and how frustrated we assume the youngster feels. And therefore, this guy came up with a way we could avoid that from ever happening because the kids are going to be able to read the text that we teach them with. It's sort of like saying our kids are going to struggle to do long division because that's conceptually hard. So let's teach them addition from now
on.
Why should we fool around with division?
Wow. This is blowing my mind because, wow. Okay.
So the trick is not avoiding it. Let's confront it.
And isn't that the thing, right? Like, so we make things easier and then we get the whole rigor movement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. And that comes up in various ways. And one of the ways that I think the rigor movement comes up is through the Common Core standards. Mm-hmm. In 2010, a bunch of states get together. They develop a set of instructional standards that frankly do something that no reading standards in any of the individual states had ever done. See, because this notion of teaching kids at their level was so at the root of American reading instruction, the standards had always avoided stating how hard the text should be that kids should be able to read.
Because it was a fear that it would be at their instructional level.
Exactly. If you taught kids if you set a standard, if you said, say, fourth graders should be able to read a fourth grade text, teachers might try to teach kids to read fourth grade text. And we, there are kids who we believe should be reading second grade text or third grade text. And so we want them to, so we don't want to set that goal. Well, the Common Core did set the goal. And all of a sudden, my first reaction, and I'd worked on the standards, but I hadn't worked on this one. I went and started looking up the research on it, looking to see if we knew any more than we did in the 1980s when I had found out what it was based on. And to my surprise, the research was actually from about 2000 on was starting to show this doesn't actually work. This doesn't promote reading. This sort of keeps kids in place. They make gains, but really small gains. And so I became a proponent of it. And unfortunately, because of all we want to be rigorous and everybody has to struggle and all that, you'd say we should be teaching kids with grade level text, and people go, yeah, struggle's really good. And so you never really got to talk about it. The problem with that is that how do you do it? How do you make it work in a classroom? And so what we actually saw happen in the 2010s, we have surveys, one that I did, and then a follow-up survey done 5 years later using the same instrument. The first one was done just before Common Core really starts to take hold in the schools. And the second one is done, we've had 5 years of experience with this. I was at work. When I did the survey, the original question was, when you teach reading, do you teach with books at the kids' reading level, at their grade level, at their interest level? What's the scheme you use? And maybe you have some other plan, please fill in the blank here. And what we found was that a certain percentage of teachers said, oh no, I always try to teach kids, or I usually try to teach kids with books at their instructional level. That's what I do. Okay, now you have standards that say kids need to learn to read the books of their grade level, that text level. So you'd think, wow, that's the shift is going to be fewer teachers teach at grade level.
That should have been the shift, right?
It went the other way. More teachers taught kids at instructional level. And I think the reason, and this is why I came to believe we keep undermining our reforms. Essentially, what teachers were doing, publishers responded, gee, if this is what teachers have to teach, we'll give them harder texts. What the teachers look and go, well, I don't know how to work with harder text. I'll do what we've always been taught to do. I'll put the youngster in easier text.
Well, and it's interesting because I remember going through that in the 2010s, where New York State did a big push and trained people from all the BOCES, and we all came together. And I remember people losing their minds over, my kids can't understand the letter from Birmingham jail. And then the answer was, well, read it a lot of times. Close read it.
What teachers do, and I mean, there's a range of teachers and there's a range of different grade levels and types of texts and all of that. And so I know there's a lot of variation. And this isn't research. This is me observing in classrooms in lots of different ways over a very long career. Often what the teachers do is what they've been told to, find an easier text. Sometimes what they do is, okay, they've given us a hard text. This is what we're supposed to work with. I read it to the kids. That solves the problem. They don't have any trouble understanding it when I read it to them. And so I got around this problem. Another one is, you'll see this, especially in the upper grades, especially in content areas. My kids are going to struggle to read the science book. So I make that optional. They can read it if they want to. And I have everything they need to know for the exam or for, whatever the assessment is. And so I don't use a book.
Well, that's a whole nother thing, right? That people are reading books, but I would go back to that whole idea with the leveled, I totally lost my train of thought with, oh shoot, keep going. Sorry.
It's different in that they're not trying to teach them to read, but it's the same in terms of since I don't know what to do with this, I don't know how to help kids bridge the gap between what they can do right now and what the text is requiring, it really falls into the same category. I think we've prevented those teachers from having the tools that would allow them to say in a science class, oh yeah, my kids, read this information in text, and that's part of how they get it.
Well, I'm nervous too, because one of the, unintended consequences of the rise of Gen AI, everybody's like, oh, it's so easy to make this reading at a lower level.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's sort of the new thing, right? We don't have to go buy a different text. We just have AI rewrite it for us. And now the kid gets a dumbed down version of this. He doesn't really get quite the same information, but who cares? We've gotten around a problem. And I guess what I'm suggesting is avoiding the problem means you keep the youngsters' level low. You make sure the kids don't, which is why a majority of kids now are actually taught with below grade level text. If we believe teacher surveys, what they claim is going on. And I do, I within some reason. And so what's very clear is a very large percentage of kids are being taught to read with texts that are below their grade level, which means that no matter how hard those kids work, there's a very good chance they're going to be reading below the levels they need to when they leave high school to fully participate and get the benefits of this society.
So, all right. So we have officially finished the doom and gloom portion of the podcast.
I hope.
And now we are going to abruptly transition into where can we find hope in this? So this podcast is aimed at school administrators. So principals, assistant principals, curriculum directors, superintendent. What are these leaders supposed to do in the face of all of this institutional, correlational inertia that has, calcified over time, and in the face of what we believe we know to be the right way to teach reading?
Yeah. Back in the 1980s, when I discovered that this study that I had been led to believe supported this idea of the instructional level, when I found out that that really wasn't that kind of a study, I published that, but got to admit, I put it in the bottom drawer of my desk and hope nobody would ever ask me about it because I didn't know what to do. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. Gee, that doesn't seem to be giving kids the advantage that I thought the research was saying that it did. So the alternative is, and I didn't have anything to fill in the blank.
Okay.
My preference was I don't want to talk about it.
Seems reasonable.
I'm going to avoid the problem the same way that a lot of people avoid it today. I'm a little older. I've been in schools a lot longer now. There've been a lot more studies out there. And now I feel pretty comfortable saying what we need to do is we need to have kids most kids taking on grade level text, whether that comes out of your book room or whether it's in a textbook. The difference isn't the books. The difference is how we match books to kids. For most, what we should be doing is trying to teach them at grade level materials. From second grade through 12th grade is what I'm talking about here. Beginners are a little different. We can talk about them, but from second grade, what the studies show is by second grade, this really does pay off. So then what? I've got a youngster who can read this well. The text that I want him to read is this hard. Now what do I do? And what we do is we don't just throw it. This isn't, oh, that's great. The kid's going to struggle. That's not the idea. The notion is, how can we scaffold, support, add explanation, whatever, that allows that youngster to make sense of that text without two things, without me reading it to him or without me telling them what it says. Kid's going to figure it out. I'm going to help. The class is going to figure it out. I'm going to help. And so now it comes down to, you got to think of what are all the things that can block somebody from comprehending a text. And the most obvious one in most classes, the one that concerns the teachers most usually, is I have kids, they might have their basic decoding skills that they learned in kindergarten and first and made, in first grade. They understand how it's supposed to work and they have some of the real simple stuff. Okay, that's good. That's where, they need to be at least there before what I'm talking about actually makes sense. But okay, given that, um, what would I do if a youngster, he still makes mistakes on the words, the reading's choppy, he's slow, it takes him a while to figure some of them out. What should I do? And there are a number of things we can do. And one of the things we can do is we can teach some of the words from the text. And I'm not talking here necessarily about vocabulary. We'll get to that. But teaching them some of the words as sight words, teaching them how to decode some of the words, because as you move up the grades and texts get harder, that tends to mean there's a larger percentage of multisyllabic words. And so, we've been maybe teaching you that in the decoding part of our instruction, but now we've got some real words that you're trying to read to make sense of this text. Why don't we go through and decode some of these together as a group before we take on the text, right? That's a little different than let's review the vocabulary. Let me familiarize you with some of the words. Now I'm actually going to show you how to read some words that you actually have to read. And so that would be a step. Another one I discovered, I found when I was writing the book, there are various studies showing that if the way you test kids is you have them read text aloud and you count up the mistakes and so on. When people have done this, where they have a youngster, say, read a test passage aloud like that, they give the youngster no feedback, no instruction. When they're done, they have them read it a second time. And you know what they find by?
I can't imagine.
The number of errors typically drops by about 50%.
When they read it a second time.
When they read it a second time.
But do they understand it?
Well, right now I'm only worried about the fluency. The fluency effort will enable comprehension, but there are other things that can derail comprehension as well. And so that's the thing. Text, we can say it has a level, but you don't know why it has that level typically. It has more multisyllabic words. So are you saying kids are having more trouble with the words? Well, we don't really have those data. We have this correlation. Well, the sentences are longer. So is it syntax? Well, can't really say that. There are lots of things that can trip any of us up. And so maybe I can't decode some of the words. Maybe I can't read the text fluently. Maybe I can read the words, but I don't know what they mean. Maybe I can read the words and I know what they mean, but the sentences are killing me because this guy has weird syntax. I can do all of that pretty well with this text, but I'm having trouble keeping the different ideas connected as I work through the text. So in a story, it might be, I can't tell which guy they're talking about here. It's like reading Hemingway dialogue. I lose track of who said this. It really matters whether it's the man or the woman. I better go back 3 pages and see if I can figure out, saying these things. Whereas in a science text, it might be, a connection of a concept across a text that, man, if you don't keep the two concepts distinguished, you're in big trouble. Or if you don't recognize that this third thing that happens is actually happening to the first thing that was introduced, you've got to get that all sorted out. And you might be having trouble there. So, I have a lot of these skills, but this text, they don't know very much about this concept.
There we go.
Yep. Fair enough. All of this stuff counts. All of it matters. And so the trick is to recognize the different possibilities. And instead of asking questions that are aimed at, let's get kids practicing their inferential skills or their main idea skills, which doesn't work, what if we start asking questions that reveal whether kids understood certain things? And so I think these kids might not know enough about electricity. And so I think they're probably getting confused in that second paragraph. I'm going to ask some questions about that. Let's see what happens. I might be wrong. The kids didn't have trouble with the second paragraph. You keep running. Oh, they did. Now I'm going to show them, I'll fill in some of that prior knowledge. Maybe they even have it. They just didn't use it. I'll show them how to use that. And as we read different texts, that problem is likely to come up more than once. And I will show them how I deal with it. I'll model it for them. And then as we work through a school year, I'm going to start saying, what did I do when I was in that spot? How would you do? Boom. I'm going to guide them to do it on the fly, with the actual text they're trying to understand.
Well, and I think people underestimate the importance of background knowledge when it comes to comprehension of reading anything. And, I think about that, if we're giving third graders a passage to read about downhill skiing and we're in, I don't know, downtown Charlotte, like, I mean, really? But
Sure.
it has, I don't know, this is another weird rabbit hole that we won't go down, but I have a 23-year-old daughter who is in her second year of teaching third grade at a deaf school, and she is deaf, and I still don't know how she learned to read. I have no idea. I asked her to tell me, I'm like, how did you learn to read? It's all sight words. She can't sound anything out.
Right.
And so but I think a lot of it was background knowledge because we were middle-class parents with college educations, and we hammered the prior knowledge and the sight word vocabulary, but we knew to do that. So I don't know.
Knowledge is important. We want to keep building knowledge. It gets tricky when you're talking about a specific text. So for example, in a lot of classrooms, what a teacher might do is say, wow, I am in, some hot weather area. The kids have never seen skiing as far as I know. They don't know what that is. And now we're going to read this article about it. Well, let's look at the article first. How explanatory is it? I mean, is the article written for somebody who isn't assumed to know anything about skiing?
Right.
If that's the case, it really isn't a problem. Oh no, they use this metaphor the kids won't get because they don't have that experience. Okay, then let's pay attention to metaphor for this one and we'll deal with that. But let's say that it really, I don't think the kids know anything about this. I'm concerned about it because I don't think they'll understand this text. And what they do is they end up telling the kids what the text is going to tell them. They head off the chance of the kids comprehending it. Whereas, I could get a 15-second film clip and say, look, here's what
skiing.
This is what skiing is. This is what they're talking about. And look how far this, woman rode or how far this guy went. And there are things that, frankly, you probably can't explain or you can't show somebody with a film clip. But I've got to say, very rarely do I think those are actually the things that trip up comprehension. And my example for this is I have grandkids who live in Hawaii. And the first time they got to experience snow was when they came to visit me in Chicago. And my grandson, who at the time was he must have been about 8. And, he's rolling in the snow. He's making snowball. He's just, this was just the most amazing thing for him. And he said, it isn't what I thought it was. It's different, meaning the feeling of it.
Yeah.
Meaning it's actual consistency. Well, I can't show the kid the consistency of snow with a film clip. And I can't explain it. I mean, you could write it down without anything to connect that to. That's really tough. He couldn't explain what he thought the consistency would be, but this was just definitely different.
It wasn't it.
What he do. It wasn't it.
That's cool.
But if you're reading about people making snowmen or throwing snowballs or skiing, I don't think it would have made, it would have been a problem not knowing that. It's a different kind of an experience. So teachers often, because they recognize kids don't have certain knowledge, they assume that knowledge just kind of overwhelms everything that the text tells you. And you don't want it to do that. You want the youngster to be able to say, gee, this is different than what I thought. To
be able to make that connection to, I got this knowledge from the text.
Exactly.
Right? Like the understanding that there's a causal connection between being able to understand what you read and put it in and cementing new knowledge.
Right. So in this text, maybe there's all kinds of information about how the person got ready and what it felt like when they went down and how much it hurt when they fell and that, what their time was and so on. And now put it in the context. They showed him a 15-second film clip of somebody doing downhill skiing. And gee, there's no reason they should have had any trouble getting any of those facts. Whereas a teacher might try to head the kid off on a lot of those facts.
Right.
In the argument, oh, we need prior knowledge. Well, prior knowledge is different knowledge. It isn't, it's context. It isn't replacing the information in the text. That's
right. The prior knowledge that builds the schema so that you at least have something to attach the new knowledge to.
Exactly.
So, all right. So we know leveled readers don't work. What else are, they're not an effective strategy. What are some other big myths that around reading instruction that you feel like have been debunked since you began your career as a teacher?
Oh, geez.
Or you can think about it in terms of changes. Like if you were going to go back and teach, what grade did you teach?
First grade, third grade, remedial reading across the elementary grades.
Okay, so two things. So let's go back. So if you were going to go back and teach primary grade learning to read, how would it be different now than when you first started teaching? What would you do differently? Or what would you do?
What would I do? Yeah. I would, one thing, the texts that I worked with, with beginning reading tended to be controlled vocabulary readers. They'd be, what people would usually think of in that category are things like Dick and Jane, right?
Yeah, like the cat sat on the ball.
No,
Like,
not that. More
not that.
the look, Dick, look. The cat runs, Dick runs, Jane runs, Dick and Jane run. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Lots of repetition of words, not so much decodable text. Today, I'd be arguing not to get rid of controlled vocabulary text. I think that's very important. I think that should play a valuable role. Decodability matters too. Some attention to that would matter. I like very much the way Freddie Hebert goes about it, which is how do I combine controlled vocabulary and decodability to make sure the beginning texts not only are easy enough, that's important, but more importantly, that actually there's enough repetition that the kids are developing some of those sight words, those high frequency words that are sticking in memory, and they're seeing certain spelling patterns often enough that they're getting good working with those so that if you throw them a new word, they can kind of make sense of that. And so I'd say at the time, it wasn't that there was no kind of cat sat on the mat kinds of texts there were, but you either went one way or you went the other. You either, went for the controlled vocabulary or you went for the decodability, and there the twain should meet.
Right.
I'd argue both of those are useful beginning supports. And so I would argue for those. That would certainly be something.
Okay. All right. Let's go up. Yeah, go ahead.
Another big change is attention to fluency.
Yeah.
The way we did fluency in those days wasn't much more than round robin reading. Mike, it's your turn. Would you read the next paragraph to everybody? I would like to believe that most classrooms or many classrooms have gotten beyond that and are doing more things like repeated reading and paired reading, where you can actually get much more extensive amounts of text practice. And, the notion of, and with repetition, doing it more than once, which we didn't do.
No, it was like you read it once and it's done. Yep.
Exactly.
Sure.
So
All
that
right.
would be a couple things.
So how about, all right, so let's say now we've learned to read ostensibly, and now we're reading to learn. So we've got reading in the content areas, upper elementary, middle school. Let's say you were going to head into one of those classrooms. How would your instruction be different?
My instruction would be different, probably not just from 50 years ago or 60 years ago, but from 10 years ago. A lot more language, a lot. We usually, when we talk about language and reading, we usually are talking about beginning reading and oral language.
Mhm.
And as you move up through the grades, written language and its very different demands become really the issue. And it's part of why kids struggle. And so some of the kinds of scaffold, well, the one that we've always given or have long given is vocabulary help. We recognize the kids might not know the meanings of some of these words. We tell them the meanings before they even read the text. And there have been some observational studies and survey studies suggesting that teachers, even though the textbooks don't do a ton of it, teachers do give kids a certain amount of guidance with using context to figure out word meanings. That seems to be something that teachers figure out, even without a lot of support. Beyond that, not much. What do we do with complex sentences? Kids are on their own most of the time. What do we do with cohesion? Maybe a lesson in pronouns. Let's move on. How do you take kids through a text so that they can make those links? We didn't do a whole lot with discourse structure, how a language is organized. And so I'd argue all of those play a big role in comprehension. We've got a ton of research on that. And there's a much smaller body of research saying, and you can teach those things and improve kids' ability to comprehend.
Even after they've learned to read.
Even after they've learned to read, because as you move up through the grades, you see words in text that you very rarely hear in oral language. Sentences get longer and more complex in terms of how the different phrases and clauses are connected, and maybe they're multi-clausal, which you don't get a lot in oral language. The complexity with which authors connect ideas across the text, that you have to make the links, I would argue are much more subtle than we ever allow in oral language, because it would just confuse people.
Right. Yeah. If you talk that way. Absolutely. Wow. I'll tell you what, Tim, you've been already so generous with your time. I want to be sensitive to that. I feel like I could talk to you forever about this stuff. You know what, maybe there's a part 2 sometime and we go and talk about instruction generally. Like what are some of the myths that have been busted over time? Like where's the big bang for the buck in terms of, levers for change, but that's a conversation for a different time.
Levers for change, that whole notion, I used to be director of reading for the Chicago Public Schools, and our teachers when I was doing that and guiding them, raised reading achievement remarkably. And I don't mean, oh yeah, we had 12 kids who did better, or we had 3 schools. I'm talking 600 schools, 437,000 kids. And we raised, reading achievement, some people say remarkably, but certainly a large amount. And so talking about what does it take to raise achievement like that on scale, a lot of people don't really know how to do that.
That's a great topic too. Oh, now we have 2 topics. Okay. The achievement scale and instruction more generally. Well, Tim, thank you so much. I mean, your most recent book is called Leveled Reading, Leveled Lives, How Students' Reading Achievement Has Been Held Back and What We Can Do About It. What a great conversation. You're a national treasure, man. You're so prolific and so thoughtful. And what I really appreciate is something that you don't often see from people who have been at this for a while, is a willingness to go back and look at your own thinking and realize where it was wrong and to change it.
Got to be willing to do that. But thanks, Mike, and say hi to Kim for me.
I certainly will. Take care.
Hang in there.